Kings and queens, yes, we're here. Hope everybody is doing well. We have some important information to share with you today. As always, we always say that we bring you content that matters, content that is always relevant for living, and as well, content that arms you, content that arms you mentally, content that arms you spiritually, consciously, emotionally, content that puts you on guard, content that makes you stay observant and relevant. Okay, because it is very, very important that you know what's going on around you and that you're not so partied reference to all the other things that are outside of you that keep you disfocused, that keep you in a state of circuitry, where you have a circus mentality, where you begin to think that everything is just about living and fun. Now, if you want to live your life that way, of course, that is up to you. And, you can shut out the world from, your spheres of living, and you're living in a bubble and you're not paying attention to what's going on. And then, of course, as a result, that will be a detriment to you and to your family as well. But if you are someone that is conscious and you're someone who wants to stay abreast of what's going on in the world so that you can protect yourself and your family, then I advise you highly to continue to visit us, continue to know what's going on around you, because it is for your life. So what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about a number of things. We're going to be going from one episode to the next so that we can give you this information as it unfolds. And I have said things before that are so relevant in the time we are living now. And I've done podcasts where I tried to make you aware of what's current and what's actually going on so that you have the information and you're not lost in the fray and you're not, drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So what's going on? I've also mentioned before about, because when we were in the height of COVID and so forth, and COVID still hasn't gone anywhere. And not long ago, there was information, and I had spoke to you guys on this monkeypox virus. Now, of course, you probably heard from Dr. Umar, who talked about the new variant of AIDS that is already in the Netherlands and is already affected. Shout out to my brother Umar Johnson, the African Pan-Africanist. And so he spoke on this very explicitly and eloquently about how this is affecting, and it's going to affect the global populace. Okay, but if you're not paying attention, then, because I did a podcast about a year ago when COVID had first hit, and I gave you detailed information on this this COVID strand and how it's working and how it, is manipulated and so forth and so on. And I got a lot of shout out from a lot of you guys, and I appreciate that. So, and I'm staying current, obviously, because I want you to be abreast of the information, and I don't want you to be in the dark as to what's transpiring. Now, when I mentioned before about this strand that we have in regards to, what's actually going on, I was giving you information as to what I thought was actually taking place with this new monkeypox virus. And now we've had so many different variants that are in our general populace right now that are floating around, unbeknownst to a lot of people, and we have to protect ourselves. So what I did say before, and I explicitly said this, and this is what I believe, and there's proof that this can be proven. Okay, and we're going to go over some other things, and we're going to come back to this. But what I did say was that I believe that this vaccine, not vaccine, but this variant rather, was geared towards sterilizing people. That it would shut down your reproductive organs. See, because what we have to understand, people, is that we're in a global war against population increase and population decrease. And for those who control, quote unquote, things on the global stage, it is in their best interest to decrease populations. Because let's face it, people are fighting for survival. This is what we have to understand. We have to understand and understand this, that people are fighting for global, what we would call retention. Okay? Global retention. They want to remain here. They want to be, and as we see the global populace steadily decline for European nations, okay, and there's an uptick, a great uptick around where you have the African diaspora around the globe that's constantly on an increase. You're fighting for survival. So what does that mean? It means that you have to lessen the growth of these undeveloped, what they call undeveloped nations, who are now on an increase of development globally. We have to decrease their numbers. Now, how do you do that? You do that through disease, you do it through water, you do it through food, you do it through environment. So you might be saying, Seth, what are you talking about? Those are the areas where you do it through. You do it through water, you do it through disease, you do it through foodstuffs, agricultural, you do it through climate. And you have to know the difference in which these things disguise themselves. And if you don't understand how these things disguise themselves, then you can be caught in the mix, and you could become a victim of what is actually happening and what is going on. Because I mentioned before too, when I was crying out and I was saying, all of these people were lining up to get the jab, lining up like cattle to get the jab. Jab me. And not only were they jabbing people once, they were jabbing people twice. Get the jab, get the booster, get this. And so now you have millions of people. You have millions of people, white and black. Because when the powers that be want to depopulate the planet, I'm not going to say it's not about race, but globally, they can sacrifice people who look like them. Okay? They can sacrifice people who look like them because the agenda is to decrease. So they can afford to sacrifice some people who look like them because it doesn't matter. But particularly those higher percentages of areas like obviously the continent, all the dark regions, the Central American nations, Guatemala, Cuba, Brazil, you name it. They want to decrease these populations. Why? Because there is a higher global residents of African people in these places. And so when I mentioned that before, I was saying how important it is for you to understand, and understand what is going on, because your survival depends on knowing what's going on. So you can't be blind to this. You can't be blind to this where you're going around, and you're not paying attention to what's happening. You're not reading. You're not staying up on what's going on. And I mentioned this before when COVID at first came out. I did a podcast, I think it was in 2020. And I said, this is what's happening. I did the research and I gave you the information. And it hasn't stopped. It hasn't stopped. And so these 4 or 5 components that I just mentioned to you, which are ways in which they can decrease the populace globally around the world, is through water. Why water? Because people need water. It's a natural substance that we all need. We've seen the crisis in Flint. We see the crisis in Mississippi. It hasn't stopped. Now they're talking about it's in Baltimore. So they know how to get rid of people. And this is by design. And Mississippi and Flint still has not become what we will call solvent in terms of their water purification systems, their water being drinkable where it's without threat. They're still dealing with this stuff. And so again, water, food, what else did I say? Water, food, environment, disease, and obviously pharmaceuticals, medicine. They can shoot you up with anything and tell you it's something, and you don't know what they're putting in your body. So it's the same with COVID. A lot of people got the jab. They don't know what they were putting, and then come to find out later on, the very thing they were putting in you wasn't protecting you from anything. So you could be walking around with all this stuff in your body, and at any moment, Creator forbid, it can let off and open up a strand in your system where you become so vulnerable to every disease named to man. Prayers that doesn't happen. But I want to read something to you in terms of what was happening in our food industry. Very important. And right now, Africa is undergoing, and I want to say this, and I want to be clear. What's at stake in the continent? What's at stake in the continent, in Africa? Because all roads leads to the continent. Make no mistake about it. Everything that the world needs is in the continent. It's because of the continent why all the countries of the world survive. Especially the European countries will not be able to survive without the continent, because they've been surviving off the continent from their inception. Through slavery, through colonization, through mineral resources that have been plundered and pillared and exploited. So their total survival is hinged on the continent. There's no debate about that. Make no mistake about it. So are other countries around the world, where you have other countries, Venezuela and other countries in these third world who are pretty much solvent, Colombia, but of course, without the resources, they keep these countries poor. Okay, so here's the thing. Now they have this environmental summit that's taking place, if it hasn't already taken place, COP 27 in Africa. Now, supposedly, this summit is about climate change. So we have to be careful because under the guise of climate change, a lot of things can happen. So why would you let the countries, see, this is what I don't understand. This is what I don't understand. Why would you let the countries, why would you even trust the countries who've exploited you, give you direction as to the environment? Why would you allow these countries, these European countries, why would you allow them to come into the continent and pretty much draw a map as to how the environment should be in the continent when it was them in the first place who have the continent so discombobulated in every facet? Why would you trust them to do anything? They're not going to do anything good. So I believe that this Crop 27 climate revitalization or climate preparedness as far as the emissions go in Africa, which is, I think, is only 3% of carbon emissions in that. They don't have a high rate of emissions. So why would you let France, Germany, England, why would you let the same countries that exploited you for hundreds of years come in and devise ways in how they're trying to tell you how things should be done, climatically, and as far as your climate goes, as far as agriculture? See, because they know that you have 60 to 65% of arable lands in the continent where you can grow vegetations more than anywhere else probably in the world. Okay, so if they destroy your soil, you won't be able to grow. If they destroy the air, which they'll probably do, then you're going to have people dropping like flies. I mean, really? Come on, y'all. Come on. Why are we still trusting that? Why are we still doing that? Where you've already allowed military bases to be set up around the continent. It's a game. It's not checkers, it's chess. I want to read this to you. This is one component, and I mentioned this to you before in terms of get a hold of your health. Know what you're eating. Read what you're eating. Know what you're putting on the table to feed your family and your children. Okay? Because we're at war with every facet of our survival. Food, water, medicine, disease, all these things. The Norwegian fish farming industry is experiencing accidents that may have serious consequences for fish farm operators, the environment, and the farm fish themselves. Fatalities, you heard what I said, fatalities and serious personal injuries, mass mortality of fish during and after operations, introgestion of genes from farmed salmon, the spread of disease and material damage to assets are among the consequences. The reputation of the industry and the market value of its products may also suffer as a result of such incidents. Other industries have developed regulations aimed at preventing incidents called major accidents, which are usually defined as accidents that have different characteristics than occupational accidents. A holistic and efficient risk management system needs to cover all types of incidents. In spite of serious accidents, regulations have yet to adopt a holistic approach to the prevention of major accidents in the Norwegian agriculture. Okay, why am I reading about Norwegian agriculture in terms of the way salmon is being farmed? Number one, I did another podcast not long ago, okay, and I mentioned very briefly about what's going on in Norway. That is because most of the salmon that is farmed in Norway comes to America. I want you to get this. I want you to pay attention. Most of the salmon that is farmed in Norway comes to America. Comes to America. Okay? And they say a holistic and efficient risk management system needs to cover all types of incidents. In spite of serious accidents, regulators have yet to adopt a holistic approach to the prevention of major accidents in Norwegian agriculture. They have yet to adopt, a holistic approach to the prevention of major accidents in Norwegian agriculture. And I read this to you. I didn't read this to you before, but I mentioned this to you before. You just heard what I just said. They haven't adopted any holistic way to prevent the accidents, to discuss ways in which it's going to curtail the damage that is being done. Here we described and discussed 5 main risk dimensions in the agriculture industry that provide a holistic view of the complex risk picture of fish farming: fish welfare, personal safety, risk to the environment and economic loss, and food safety. Hazards that emerge in the fish production process and in the local environment have consequences both for the fish farm and for society as a whole, on the one basis of characteristics drawn from definitions of major accidents, regulations in other industries, and the risk dimensions of fish farming. We propose a general definition of major accidents. The definition is discussed based on the type of risks that occur in fish farming and with an emphasis on accidents that have happened in the Norwegian agriculture industry. The occurrence of major fish farming accidents shows that it shows that a systemic approach to safety and risk management is needed. Okay? Okay, let me read that one more time. It shows, one sec. It talks about the economic food loss and safety, hazards that emerge in the fish production process and in the local environment have consequences both for the fish farm and for society as a whole. You hear that? On the basis of characteristics drawn from definitions of major accident regulations and other industries and the risk dimensions of fish farming, we propose a general definition of major accidents. Okay, the definition is discussed based on the type of risks that occur in the fish farming and with an emphasis on accidents that have happened in the Norwegian agriculture industry. The occurrence of major fish farming accidents shows that a systemic approach to safety and risk management is needed. Regulators and industry are already looking to the offshore petroleum industry in order to develop and adapt technology and risk management for agriculture. Approaches to risk regulations in the two industries are discussed and some differences pointed out. Barrier management is one of the potentially holistic and systemic major risk management methods required in offshore regulations that is seen as a possible way forward for the fish farming industry, and we offer some reflection on adopting this method to fish farming. Okay, so let me tell you what's going on. Let me tell you what is going on. in the way in which fish farming is being conducted in Norway and how they're spawning the salmon. They're spawning the salmon in an unnatural habitat where salmon have a higher potential, which is actually happening now, have the higher potential of being diseased and infected, going through market and the way it's being produced and mass produced, where from farm to shipping to distribution to retail to your table, and you don't know what the hell you're eating, and you're actually eating poisoned salmon. And this is why I said that I had bought some salmon a couple of weeks ago, and I said I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it. It's in my freezer, and I said I'm going to have to find another way because that's going to be it for me eating salmon. So unless I know that salmon is fresh salmon that's coming from a place where it's uninterrupted, where there's no interference, where man is adding his way to where it's becoming unnatural, then I'm not going to buy it. And there's ways in which you can know that. Okay, so we want to move on, and we're going to give you some more information. Okay, so here we go. In emergencies at sea, it is crucial that the crew members remember emergency tasks. Although these practical skills are occasionally trained for, some are not routinely practiced, and it is expected that performance of these skills will degrade over time. This program evaluation addresses whether characteristics can predict performance of marine emergency skills, specifically during relearning of two equipment preparations and donning tasks included in marine emergency duties refresher, which they call MED-R courses. The time since an individual had completed prerequisite training, the type of course for officers or ratings, and the age of the individuals were hypothesized to be significant predictors of performance patterns in the initial cohort of trainees. Okay, we're going to stop there for a moment, and we're going to come right back. So hold on for us, and we'll be right back, okay, with more information on this topic. Stay with us. Okay, kings and queens, we're back again, and we're going to recap on what we were talking about in regards to food, water, environment, disease, medicine. Okay, and as we mentioned before we took a break, we're going to be talking about the deforestation and the salmon that is toxic, that's coming from Norway, that comes through, obviously, to the U.S., and how we were talking about before when I did a podcast, we were talking about health, how critical it is, and what we ingest, what we take, what we eat, what we feed our families. And all of this has to do with global decreasing populations. And as I mentioned, and I'll say it again, water, foodstuffs, environment, disease, medicine, pharmaceuticals, and all these things that affect us every day. And this is what we have going on around the globe. And this is why I mentioned also in the former podcast how there's a climate summit that's taking place called COP27 in the continent, in Africa. And under the guise of trying to get a cap and control emissions and of course, as I mentioned before, Africa only has a 3% emissions problem, which is not a lot, okay? Because, of course, we have more of that in the U.S. than anywhere else. We do have, in other areas, countries in Africa, obviously, that are highly populated. And we do have some crowded countries in Africa that there is a lot of, where you have, I don't know if I want to say a lot, but we have a higher increase of emissions as opposed to maybe some other African countries that are more, have more land mass where it's spread it out, more than others. Okay. So we want to talk about this. And we want you to obviously support what we're doing because we're bringing you content all the time that matters. We're not just on here talking about stuff that's not relevant. We're not on here wasting your time. We're not on here giving you, some Hollywood, what's going on with Nick Cannon and how many babies he got. And, we're not on here talking about Hollywood celebs and the next concert or what the next toy that they bought. It doesn't matter. That's not important. That's not important. And see, we oftentimes are gravitating towards stuff that don't matter. We're and this is why you even have people, trust me, you even have people who do podcasts that monitor other people who do podcasts, particularly people that look like us, black folks, who are in competition with other people who do podcasts because they ain't talking about shit. And they'll search podcasts looking to see what you're talking about. See, this is how messed up our people are. I know that it happens. And this is why we don't come together. And that's, of course, not all of us, but it's a lot of us. It's not my fault you're not talking about nothing. And granted, I spoke on the Kyrie Irving situation because I found that, and areas of content that it was relevant. There were some things that were relevant about that. Yeah, as did others. And so, yes, but for the most part, you will not hear me talking about things that happen in that genre, because I'll leave that for other people to do. But if I find where it's relevant and it's important and where I can take it another level, because I want to give information that is going to help us. Okay? So I want to make that clear. I want to be upfront about that. Okay, so moving right along, we were talking about the industry and how, and I did mention this before, as I said before, and we're going to be talking more about this. So let's move on. Farm salmon from Norway, the most toxic food on the planet. Now listen to this. As I was preparing to cook a delicious salmon raised without antibiotics, reflecting the good intentions of its farmers, I came across an online documentary about the dark side of aquaculture. They call it aquaculture. I'm reporting it to you here because it is true that it is easy to want to buy a farm fish, given its abundance in store and its relatively cheap price. The fish is naturally healthy, rich in omega-3 and DHA. This documentary will, unfortunately, convince you otherwise. Now, and this is probably a documentary that I had spoke on before and how this similar, but we'll get into it. It is not so much the fact that there are antibiotics or not, or even industrial quantities of pesticides that make it so harmful, but rather an accumulation of a highly toxic products from the fish's own food. Did you hear what I said? I'll read it again. It is not so much the fact that there are antibiotics or not, or even industrial quantities of pesticides that make it so harmful, but rather an accumulation of a highly toxic products from the fish's own food. What the journalists discovered is that there are much more toxins in farmed fish than any other food source. Did you hear me? Okay, there are much more toxins in farmed fish than any other food source, including beef, eggs, and traditional farm chickens. And we're going to get more into that. The most devastating of these toxins lies in the dry food fed to the raised fishes. 70% of the salmon eaten on the planet comes from Norway. And I was telling you guys this before in the other podcast, and I said I would be back to give you more information. And this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm here to give you this information. It says, I'll read this one more time. Listen to this. The most devastating of these toxins lies in the dry foods fed to the raised fishes. 70% of the salmon eaten on the planet come from Norway. They are fed with a dry porridge of fish from the Baltic Sea, one of the most polluted in the world, landlocked by industrial countries that dump their waste, including Russia, Poland, and Germany, and whose waters are only renewed every 30 years. Did you hear that? These fish are transformed into a protein powder and oil, to which is added a neurotoxic substance produced by Monsanto to prevent rancidity. The report reveals disturbing facts about a scientist studying this substance and the effects on humans, as well as the fisheries minister in Norway. In short, a lot in the same plate. Even the best osteopathic manual therapy won't take heavy metals out of your brain. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? The report reveals, I'm reading it again, disturbing facts about a scientist studying this substance and the effects on humans, as well as the fisheries minister in Norway. In short, a lot in the same plate. Even the best osteopathic manual therapy won't take heavy metals out of your brain. Here's a documentary that will change your brain forever. And excuse me, I said that, and it was the creator that made me say it, but that's not what it said. It says, here is a documentary that will change your menu forever. And I said, your brain. That is true too, though. That is true too. 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 Now listen to this. No, listen to this woman for 1 minute. I want you to listen to this.
In her opinion, brain contamination, but also probable carcinogenic effects. The problem is that over the last few years, Victoria Bone hasn't been able to publish any of her results in a scientific journal.
Why can you not make it? Who doesn't want you to make it?
Because I'm no longer employed at the Institute. I lost my status as a researcher, and suddenly I didn't have the right to publish my scientific research.
At the end of her thesis, and despite her many discoveries, Victoria Bone had indeed left the State Research Institute. Officially, voluntarily. But I was about to discover that the reality was a bit different from the official version.
Because I finally decided that I no longer wanted to deal with this question anymore.
Why? You say you have 6 publications ready. You seem like you want to publish it. You seem frustrated.
Do you like... If you will take away camera, then we can talk first about this, and then...
Off camera, Victoria Bone confirms that she had been pressured, and there were even some attempts to falsify some of her results.
I can tell you now this...
In the hope of finding a job and one day publishing her research, she chose not to denounce these practices in the media. But others have done so before her, because she was not the first to have been forced out. In 2006, this woman, Claudette Bethune, also a researcher at the NIFES, had also measured the presence of hazardous substances in salmon. In a Norwegian newspaper, she had accused her superiors and the Ministry of Fisheries of pressuring her and falsifying her findings.
I'm going to just stop there for a moment. They wanted her to falsify the information that she was actually getting from the research on this toxic salmon that is in this area, okay? And they wanted her to falsify the information that this toxic salmon and the practices in which the way that this farmed salmon is being raised and how toxic it is. Okay, 2 thoughts on farmed salmon from Norway, the most toxic food on the planet. I tried to eat healthy and thought I found a healthy source of protein, much to my surprise. Excuse me. My Norwegian farms raised salmon was not that healthy. After researching this product and finding out how they are fed, I can no longer consume this fish, which, by the way, is very tasty. I do wish companies would hold to a higher standard and take in consideration the health, or what probably should say, the health and well-being of all the people that love to eat this fish. I, for one, will not buy it again. Here's another person saying, what I can't believe, can't believe, it is years since Norway farm-raised salmon was touted as toxic. Has that improved? If so, why do they sell it in every market throughout the U.S.? And they do. They do. And we think that we're getting good salmon and we're getting toxic salmon. See, because what they do, they have a way in which when the salmon is processed, they can camouflage it and put this dye in it that make it look so rich, red, and pink, that you think that it's really fresh, and it's coming from those areas where You might go out to where are some of those places where you have the grizzlies and the bears who they wait at the streams where the salmon are jumping out of the water. That's not the salmon that we're getting. That particular salmon right there is probably for those who the high elites and people with who are rich can afford to send people out and have that fish flown into them. When you have money like that, you can do that. You can have people go out there and they have licenses where they can go out there. I mean, you take a chance on getting mauled by a damn bear, but there are ways in which they have people who can go out there and get the freshest of the freshest, if you know what I mean. But a lot of us can't do that. So we're eating, where it just said most of the salmon that is imported that comes into the U.S. is coming from Norway and around the planet. And the ways in which it's being processed is detrimental to our health. Okay, and let us go back. We're going to read some more. And we're going to move on from here. Okay, and we're going to continue. And I mentioned too to you that the deforestation, and I'm going to tie all of that in because one has a lot to do with the other. And the reason for it is because the planet is rapidly growing more and more. And so they need to mass produce things much faster to feed the planet. So a lot of what's happening is, you heard the term force feeding. You can't force feed somebody something that they don't want. So this is kind of what's going on in the food industry. In a sense, they're force feeding these salmons with all of this toxic stuff, and to grow so that the salmon is produced exponentially to create a greater market for the salmon to come into the U.S. and around the world. Okay, it says here, an inside look into the fish industry reveals disturbing facts that could threaten your health. The salmon farming is a disaster, both for the environment and for the human health, and tests show farm salmon is about 5 times more toxic than any other food tested. Oh my goodness, listen to this. In animal feeding studies, mice fed, listen to this. In animal feeding studies, mice-fed farm salmon develop obesity and diabetes. Effects researchers believe are related to toxin exposures. Besides pesticides and antibiotics used in fish farming, the most significant source of toxic exposure is the dried pellets feed, which contain dioxins, PCBs, and other toxic pollutants. And this is what I mentioned in the last podcast, where I mentioned how they're feeding these salmon these pellets, and it's toxic. And those of us who are eating it are ingesting it. Nicholas Daniels' documentary, Filet O Fish, takes a critical look at the industry, featuring exclusive footage from fish farms and factories across the globe. Many still have a rather romanticized view of fishing, but when it comes to large-scale food production, the picture is actually rather grim. Today's fisheries are faced with a range of severe problems from overfishing to chemical pollution and genetic mutation from toxic exposures. As noted by the producers of the film, through intensive farming and global pollution, the flesh of the fish we eat has turned into a deadly chemical cocktail. Listen to that. Despite that, the fish business is booming, in part due to efforts to keep the dirty underbelly of modern fisheries from public sight. And this is why I'm telling you, because I do the research. And so this is why I can come on and tell you that eating this stuff is critical and it's toxic and it's killing us. And so we have to find alternative ways in which to keep our families and ourselves healthy, that we have a healthy diet. Aquaculture promotes itself as a sustainable solution to overfishing, but in reality, fish farms actually cause more problems than they solve. There's really little difference in terms of environmental pollution between land-based feedlots and water-based ones. Okay, and I in the last a few podcasts that I did when I was mentioning this, there were two guys that were actually in Norway, and they were actually taking pictures unbeknownst to the guy who they were filming, who were actually showing him with his great big holes pouring pollutants in the water from the deforestation in the fisheries that are in that area. And they were filming him unbeknownst to him. He didn't see them because, of course, they wanted to have the truth for themselves, obviously, so they can go back and report it to show the regulatory procedures that were actually taking place at these fisheries. Okay? Give you an idea. Farm salmon, white lines are fat. Higher fat content, higher in toxins in the fat. Colored added to look like salmon. This is what I was telling you a little bit ago. Colored to make it look like salmon. Doctors warn women and children should avoid it. Not good for whales. It's not even good for damn whales. So if it's not good for whales, why would we be eating it? And so that salmon that looks really pink, that is the toxic salmon. See, because salmon in its natural habitat it looks more like a reddish kind of like a pomegranate, okay, in its flesh. That is wild salmon, opposed to farm salmon. Now, wild salmon, it says, is leaner, cleaner, naturally pink. It's naturally pink. Good for our oceans, good for whales. Vanishing whenever there are salmon farms. Okay? So we know that there are areas where when we go into these stores and we see that salmon with the white lines, they say are fat. That's a higher fat content, but it's higher in toxins in the fat. That's what that is. Colored added to look like salmon. Doctors warn women and children should avoid it. Not even good for whales, as I said. So why would it be good for us? And it says the video starts off in Norway, and we're going to come back and give you more of this. Starts off in Norway. Looking at the chemicals used in the fish farms, Kurt Odekop is a respected Norwegian environmental activist, and he believes salmon farming is a disaster both for the environment and for human health. Like I said before, now why is it that fish farming in Norway is so prevalent? And as I mentioned, it is because of population of the planet. And so we have to mass produce exponentially stuff in greater numbers and faster because we can't keep up with allowing things to go through their natural process of germination and spawning. And why is that? A lot of it is because we overfish. We don't give the fish their time to spawn and to go through the natural processes. So we're overfishing. We're deforestating the forests for more land so the cows can graze. And meanwhile, as a result of that, as I mentioned in other podcasts, we're spraying chemicals and pesticides in the atmosphere where the cows are grazing. Why? Because when you cut down more forestry, what you're actually doing is you're releasing most of the insects that need the forest to survive. And so they have to go somewhere. So where do they go? The insects that need to survive off the forestry, they go where the cows are pasturing to eat the grass. And as a result of the insects going where the cows are, they have to spray. You understand what I'm saying? So therefore, the cows, the chickens, and all these other things that we depend on are contaminated. Oh my goodness. So here we are. So we're going to hold and we're going to come back and we're going to end this up. I wanted to give you this information to show you how important this is. And we're going to stay with us. We're going to be right back and we're going to finish up. And so remember to support us. Go to Patreon, go to Amazon, Apple Music, go to our Cash App, Seth Moore, and drop us something in there. We will greatly appreciate it. And again, we're always going to bring you content that matters. Okay? Stay with us. Okay, kings and queens, for our conclusion, we're back. And we're talking about, as we mentioned before, the 5 ways in which depopulation happens. And of course, there are 1,000 ways in which it can be implemented, but we're focusing on water, foodstuffs, environment, pharmaceuticals, and disease. Okay, so as we were reading about the toxic salmon that is coming from Norway, we're dealing with the foodstuffs now, right? That's coming from Norway that's potentially killing people all around the globe. Okay, let us. We're going to continue to read, and we're going to go to another segment. Yes, we're going to go to another segment, and we're going to be talking about deforestation. Okay? Okay, so now listen up. Below the salmon farms dotted across the Norwegian fords, there's a layer of waste some 15 meters high, teeming with bacteria, drugs, and pesticides. In short, the entire sea floor has been destroyed. Listen to this. And since the farms are located in open water, the pollution from these farms is in no way contained. Listen to this. Being that these salmon farms, and as I would say, they have these big vats, and I was looking at it on the TV during the documentary. They have these big vats where they're farming the salmon. So when they're casting these pellets to feed the salmon and it's polluting the waters, where else is it going? And it's telling you here, these bacteria, drugs, and pesticides, in short, the entire sea floor has been destroyed. And since the farms are located in open water, the pollution from these farms is in no way contained. Leave it to the man, and he destroys everything. The salmon farm can hold upwards of 2 million salmon in a relatively small amount of space. 2 million salmon in a small. So how common sense would tell you got 2 million salmon in a small area where they're basically trapped to spawn and to do what they need to do. These crowded conditions, listen to this. These crowded conditions result in disease, which spreads rapidly among the stressed salmon. Obviously it does. According to Odekab, sea lice, pancreas disease, PD, and infectious salmon anemia virus, ISA, have spread all across Norway. Yet consumers are not informed of these fish pandemics, and sale of these disease fish, continue unabated. A number of dangerous pesticides are used in an effort to starve off disease-causing pests, one of which is known to have neurotoxic effects. Fish has always been considered a health food, but according to Odekab, today's farm salmon is one of the most toxic foods in the world. Toxicology researcher Jerome Rustin has confirmed Odekab's claims. He tested a number of different food groups sold in Norway for toxins, and indeed, farm salmon contains the greatest amount of toxins of them all, and by an incredibly large margin. Overall, farm salmon is 5 times more toxic than any other food product tested in animal feeding studies. Mice-fed farm salmon grew obese. So they took the toxic salmon and fed it to mice. And it says that the mice-fed farm salmon grew obese. So the mice became obese. With thick layers of fat around their internal organs, they also develop diabetes. Isn't this something? Rusin notes that a theory gaining traction is that raising rates of obesity is related to the increasing number of toxins and pollutants were exposed to through our environment and food in light of these own studies. Rosen has stopped eating farm salmon. I don't blame you, because I have too. Okay, so as we see, and it talked about diabetes. So how many of us in the U.S. are suffering from diabetes because of diet, because of what we're eating, because we don't know what we're eating. We don't know how it's been treated, but we trust the consumer. We trust, not the consumer, but we trust the retailer that what we're getting is healthy and it's being produced in its natural habitat and it's growing the way it should and it's being raised the way it should. But they're not going to tell you you're eating toxic food. They have an obligation to stockholders. They have an obligation to people who have shares in these franchises and so forth. You know, they're not going to tell you. They're about making money. They don't care about your health. They don't care about your health at all. Okay, we're going to read a bit more of this and we're going to move on. Genetic mutations and other crazy facts. Besides keeping pests like sea lice in check, the pesticides used also affect the fish's DNA, causing genetic mutations. Disturbing examples of deformed cod are shown in the film. And I've seen some of these fish, and some of these fish, they had scabs, eyes hanging out, and I mean, it was horrendous. Just looking at some of these fish and how messed up it looked like the fish got into a gunfight. You know what I'm saying? Had scabs on their scales and eyes drooping out of their heads and just all kinds of petrified, diseases. It was terrible looking. I said, this is what we're eating. Because when they take the scales off and they fillet that fish and dress it up and do what the dyes and all those things, you never know the difference. What's even more disturbing is that according to other cod, about 50% of farm cod are deformed in this fashion, and female cod that escape from farms are known to mate with wild cod, spreading the genetic mutation and deformities into the wild population. Listen to that. Farm salmon suffer less visible but equally disturbing mutations. The flesh of the farm salmon is brittle and it breaks apart when bent, a highly abnormal feature. The nutritional content is also wildly abnormal. Wild salmon contains about 5 to 7% fat, whereas the farm variety can contain anywhere from 14.5 to 34%. Many toxins accumulate most readily in fat, which means even when raised in similarly contaminated conditions, farm salmon will contain far more toxins than wild salmon. Shockingly, research reveals that the most significant source of toxic exposure is not actually the pesticides or the antibiotics, but the dry pellets feed. See that? Pollutants found in the fish feed include dioxins, PCBs, and a number of different drugs and chemicals. What makes the fish toxin so toxic? So what's wrong with the fish feed? Why is it so toxic? In one Norwegian fish pellet plant, the main ingredient turns out to be eel, used for their high protein and fat content in other fatty fish from the Baltic Sea. But the Baltic Sea is so polluted through the pollutants that they put in the water. In Sweden, fishmongers are now... Okay, let me read this above first. I'm sorry. That's where the problem begins at the Baltic. is highly polluted. Some of the fish used have toxic levels of pollutants, which then simply get incorporated into the feed pellets. In Sweden, fishmongers are now required to warn patrons about the potential toxicity of Baltic fish. According to the government recommendations, you should not eat fatty fish like herring more than once a week. And if you're pregnant, fish from the Baltic should be avoided altogether. And I'm going to it's more for me to read there, but I'm going to stop. Okay, I'm going to stop right there for now, and we're going to go on to just a bit of the deforestation piece of it. Let's go back. Okay? Yep, let's just hold on me for 1 sec. Okay, so we're here. Hope you're still with us. Okay, so the dangers of deforestation and what's actually happening, and how that deforestation is affecting us and the ecosystem so greatly. So when you couple that with what's already happening with foodstuffs, as I read to you about the salmon, the toxic salmon that's being distributed around the world, and how it's killing folks, and how that we're not cognizant of the way and how this salmon is being produced and raised, and the effects that it has on the global populace, that's destroying, people's molecular systems and women and children from being able to, women particularly being able to have reproductive continuity as far as children, and just how it affects giving people cancer, and people are going to the doctor and have to have ovaries removed and all this other different stuff because what is being ingested. Okay, so that is critical. So we're going to read this to you. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay. We all know what deforestation is, most of us. Okay, deforestation is the total removal of trees and other vegetation from land. It can caused by human activities such as logging or agriculture, but also natural disasters like forest fires. It has a negative impact on many species because it causes habitat fragmentation and loss. Okay, so as I mentioned to you before, the greatest part of deforestation, if it's not, of course, because it happens as I just read, through fires and so forth and so on. But deforestation in terms of man's greed, man's inability to find other ways of ingenuity and how to create expansive land masses for animals to graze. So this is why we have such a high rate of deforestation, not only with logging, because more and more we're trying to build more, industry and so forth and so on. So it means that we need trees, right? But the other thing, and the downside of that, is that as we deplete the ecosystem for survival, we need trees to breathe, because that's where we get our oxygen from. Okay? So this is causing a great malfunctioning of our ecosystem. But that's not all. Animals are equally affected by forest fragmentation or forest degradation. Forest fragmentation is the reduction in the size of an intact forest area or the development of gaps in the formerly contiguous forest. This means less space to live in, more competition, and higher risk of disease transmission. On top of that, they may have trouble finding enough food due to changes in plant composition and distribution, as I had mentioned earlier. The insects and frogs and other things that depend on forestry in terms of survival, if you cut away those natural habitats, then what do? They die, and you're decreasing the animal production that needs to live off of the natural habitat of the forest. Forest degradation. It occurs, when forests are damaged, destroyed in ways that reduce their ability to provide ecosystem services. This process leads to changes in soil structure, water flow patterns, plant communities, wildlife populations, and more. These changes also have serious consequences for animal survival. Conversion to farmland is one of the biggest causes. Large-scale crops like cattle ranching or growing soybean and oil palm requires huge areas of agricultural lands. Fuel wood and firewood are used for cooking and heating around the world, and timber is used for building houses, furniture, and paper products. Okay. And so I just want to read some of this. I'm not going to go over all of this right now, but like I said, we'll come back and visit it. Population growth and urbanization. Many of these drivers are also related as population increase around the world. Demands for meat. Listen to this. Meat increases and more land is cleared. This is what I was saying before. More land is cleared for cattle pasturing. This is particularly a problem in the Amazonian forest. So when you begin to cut away more forestry, as I mentioned before, so that you have more animals that can graze, so that means you're stripping forestry, trees that are being depleted, that are being cut down without replanting those trees. And there's some efforts around the world. I forget the Indian guy's name, who has committed, and he's doing a great job in certain regions. And he's committed to planting 1 million trees over a given amount of time, which is a great thing. Because we need our trees, we need our forestry. So forestry has to come back. We need to save the ecosystem from these destroyers, because that's what they're doing because of greed. But again, as I just mentioned, and of course it means that essentially deforestation is an economic problem. And as I mentioned and read, the wild animals need suitable habitat areas where they are safe, secure, and comfortable. They use these areas for resting, sleeping, feeding, breeding, hiding, and escaping predators. But when we disrupt these areas, animals lose access to important resources and become exposed to new threats, which is so true. It can cause them to completely lose their homes or be forced out of their natural range. And that's just think about us as humans. You know, if you were to take away, which is being done all the time, if you were to take away the essential things from human beings, water, sustenance, we wouldn't be able to survive. So why would you do that to the animals? The Creator put them here. They have a place here to continue to regenerate the ecosystem so that we can live. Everything that they do is cause and effect. It's for us to survive, but yet we're destroying it. It worsens the climate change by increasing greenhouse gas emissions. This can affect weather and water availability and increase the risk of natural disasters. See, and this is what happens when you're not balanced, you're not in tune with the universe, you're not conscious. You'll mess up the ecosystem, which is being done every day. You don't have no concern about balance. This is the mind of the destroyer. This is the mind of someone who is not spiritually connected with a higher source in the universe. So arbitrarily, they'll just destroy the ecosystem because they're not connected and they don't see the value in keeping the ecosystem balanced. Animal species threatened by forest loss may also face increased competition with others and can be a higher risk of being killed by predators who have also lost their natural habitat. It would be the same if you... This is why I'm going to say this, I'm going to be done. This is why when you're driving along in your car and you see deer on the side of the road, see a big buck who's been hit by a car or a truck and is just laying there dead on the side of the road. Why? Why? It's because of greed. It's because constantly they're stripping away deforestation for these animals to be able to live. And so these deer, they're trying to find pasture, and they'll go so far in the woods and they'll run out. They'll run out into the highway thinking probably that they're still in the woods, and all of a sudden they'll get hit by a truck. Why? Because they're cutting away the areas in which these animals need to live, building more townhouses, building more highways, building more communities because of greed, cutting away the natural habitat where these animals need to live, sleep, eat, continue to reproduce themselves. And if they don't have the ability to do that because of greed and because of the way in which the ecosystem is being treated, then we don't give them a chance to survive. So what if someone was to do that to you, in which they are doing that to us by doing this? Okay. Thus, the impact of deforestation may be direct or indirect, but the end result is the same: population decrease and higher risk of extinction. And that's what we're talking about. Depopulation, right? Didn't we start out with that? And we gave you the 5 components in which this is being done. And we're giving you all of them. We haven't gotten into the pharmaceuticals yet. We did in a year or so ago when we did, of course, with COVID, but we're going to be talking about, we've already talked about foodstuffs. We talked about deforestation, which has to do with the environment. But that even goes another level or two when we're talking about environment in terms of the air that we breathe and so forth and so on. And we'll get into that, and we'll begin to talk about the pharmaceuticals and the other levels of environment that affect us in terms of the water and the air that we breathe. And all of this is inclusive in the deforestation piece as it relates to when you're cutting away all this vegetation and so forth. It affects the water systems and all. And so we're not off in what we're talking about. We're right on track. So again, we're going to be coming back to visit this, and we ask that you stay with us. We ask that you support, because we're bringing you content that matters. We're bringing you content that is certainly relevant to everyday living. And so we ask for your support. We ask that you go to our hashtag on Cash App and Seth Moore, and you drop in $1 to support us. Forget the naysayers, because they're out to destroy. They're out to create disbalance amongst us, and we want to keep balance. Okay, so we look forward to speaking with you again. Support, and we're greatly appreciative on what you do for us. Okay, so until next time, this is Seth Moore. You can find us Amazon, Spreaker, what else? Apple Music, Podbean, and many other host sites. And so until next time, we'll be talking with you again. Stay tuned. Stay up and stay high. Okay, bye-bye.